Good evening and welcome to the Too Deep podcast. Back with you as always, Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network and NFL.com. Eric Eager from Pro Football Focus, PFF.com to the uninitiated. My name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. You can catch my show if you're outside the Kansas City area at 810WHB.com. Gentlemen, here we are, the divisional round, the best weekend of football. Is it indeed that? I think so. I think we would all agree it's the best weekend of football. We're going to cover each one of the games: KC, Buffalo, Tennessee, Cincinnati, the Bucs and the Rams, and of course the Packers and the 49ers. Also want to hit a couple of topics before we get into the games. Raiders firing Mike Mayock. Where are they going next? The Steelers throw some early wagers around on who their quarterback's going to be next year, and what is the right path for the Cowboys and their head coach. Let's start right there, Jeff. Mike McCarthy, they're going to fire him, right? Do they do it now or do they wait 12 or 24 months from now? This seems like an inevitability. Listen, I'm interested in what you think they're going to do and what you think they should do.
Well, if you've followed the history of the Dallas Cowboys ever since Jimmy Johnson was their head coach, you know that Jerry Jones has a lot of patience with head coaches who are willing to defer to him and let him live the kind of ownership life he wants to have, which is overshadowing every coach he's ever had. So Jason Garrett was there for 10 years. Wade Phillips was there a lot longer than he should have been. You can go up and down the list of other people who've been in that job. And so I think Mike McCarthy will be there for a while. And I say that because he was in the playoffs. They won 12 games. They won the NFC East. That division, as much as we're talking about what happened to them over the weekend, still remains very much within their grasp. The Washington football team is a long way, in my mind, from being a serious threat. I mean, they won the division last year, 7-9, but that's more about the Cowboys falling apart. The Eagles have some hopeful things going on over there. They've got 3 draft picks. 3 of the top 19 picks in next year's draft or this year's draft coming up, and some talented young players. But again, can Jalen Hurts be that guy for them? And the Giants are just a crap show. And so I think Mike McCarthy can compete in the NFC East to win that division at least a couple more years, which gives him a lot of leeway with Jerry Jones.
Yeah, he can't compete. Is that the right path though? Is he the right guy? Is that it's not even necessarily is he a good coach, right? Can this be a functional relationship with the combination of what the fans are going to say and Jerry Jones as an owner, Eric? I mean, is that, can this combination work? Because good coaches get fired and go on to have successful stints elsewhere. Can this combination work in Dallas right now?
Is that the objective function for Jerry Jones? Because the last time he had what I would consider to be, he had Parcells, right? He had Parcells, and Parcells, had basically 3 winning seasons in 4, made the playoffs twice, but ultimately not as successful as McCarthy's been so far. Let's be honest on the, in terms of wins, losses. The last time he had a rock star head coach, a guy that could take this team to the Super Bowl consistently. And I'm not talking about, taking the already, I'm not talking about Barry Switzer taking a already made team and winning a Super Bowl. A guy who was an alpha, a really good head coach. The last time that Jerry Jones had that guy, he fired him. And that was Jimmy Johnson. He fired him after 2 straight Super Bowls. And I think this time of year and also during games, it's important, for people like me especially who are always what are they doing to optimize their win chances? What are they doing to optimize their Super Bowl chances? And for people like me to take a step back and say, well, maybe that's not actually what they're doing. Maybe Jerry Jones owns this team to him it's more important to have control than it is ultimately to win. And let's be honest, this league makes Bengals ownership a lot of money. What the hell do you think it makes Dallas Cowboys ownership? So that's I think one of the reasons why you're going to see McCarthy is, McCarthy is going to be a lot of things, but a train wreck he's not going to be. right? Like long term, he's going to be a fairly modest coach that'll take you to some 12-win seasons. They'll get you games like this. In Green Bay, you had the loss in Atlanta that, in the NFC title game. You had the meltdown against Seattle in 2014. You had a loss to Eli Manning in 2011. I think that ultimately, Jeff's right. Like, I think like McCarthy's the right man for the job if you're Jerry Jones,
because he can control him, because he's a competent coach that won't screw up and he can be controlled.
Like if you put somebody in there who, like, I mean, even look, there was rumors that they wanted Mike Zimmer, right, for a long time, like right before the Vikings beat the Saints in the 2019 wild card round. There were rumors that the Cowboys were going to go after Zimmer. Zimmer had been a defensive coordinator there, and he's a big Parcells guy and all that kind of stuff. I think about that as far as dodging a bullet. Like, Zimmer is like probably the reason Spielman got fired, right? Right. Like, there are certain personality types that I think would not make it through Dallas. Jason Garrett, I mean, there's the characteristics there as to why he was there for a decade, even though he was never all that great. And I think McCarthy sort of is along those lines as well.
I think, Jeff, for me, what everyone's going to say, well, Jerry Jones needs to sell the team, right? Well, that's not happening. And no. Is it just beyond? And I think, listen, for me, I think the Cowboys should move on. Because I think what's going to happen is, I think I said this the other day. I don't get the Dan Quinn fascination, right? Like that is such a product of, and I'm not sure that owners feel this way. I'm not sure if it's just the NFL, machinery that's talking that Dan Quinn's the top guy. I get interviewing him, and I know everybody is. No. So maybe he is one of the top candidates, but he had 1 year in Atlanta, and Kyle Shanahan made Matt Ryan an MVP quarterback. And otherwise, nothing went right. And in this game, Mike McCarthy's being crushed. And in reality, Dan Quinn got pantsed for the entire first half, right? Like, if they'd had a competent quarterback in San Francisco, or maybe I should just say even a healthy Jimmy Garoppolo, then they would have been destroyed on defense. Yet somehow the fascination and the idea that Matt Moore is a worthy candidate and somehow Mike McCarthy should be fired. And I know, Eric, you and Jeff on the PFF Forecast podcast talked about this. I don't understand how you can separate those two. So for me, leaving Mike McCarthy, and maybe that's it. Maybe it keeps Jerry Jones, keeps the arrows from going at Jerry Jones, and that's the best way for him. But if it's to win football games, you're going to end up firing this guy anyway. Why not get onto your guy? Put Matt Moore in there, who seems to be his handpicked guy.
Kellen Moore, you think about
Kellen Moore, excuse me. Put Kellen Moore in there, who seems
Matt
to be
Moore would be a good coach too. I feel like
probably would. He coached high school ball.
Do the same thing.
Yeah. Why not just get him in there and find out if he's any good? It's where you want to go anyway. At least Al Davis, like Jerry Jones, is like, Al Davis without the stones. Al Davis would hire Lane Kiffin at 29. Like, hey, I think this is going to be the guy. Let's go do it. At least you got in there and found out it wasn't going to work. Like, I like Jerry Jones seems like afraid to even put in the guy he wants. How long did we hear Jason Garrett was going to be the Cowboys coach before he was finally the Cowboys coach? Right? Kellen Moore's going to coach the Cowboys. Get to it.
I think Jerry Jones, to go back to what Eric said about Jimmy Johnson, Jerry Jones pretty much tipped his hand 25 years ago with that move, or whatever it was, 30 years ago now? It's 26 years. Yeah. Because winning wasn't the most important thing to him. If winning was the most important thing, Jimmy Johnson would have coached over a decade. They would have won more championships, and they'd be the most lauded franchise in the history of sports. Jerry Jones cares about the show. And if you go down there and you spend time around the Star, you see what that place is like on game day. It's more about the show than it is about the winning. And I don't think Jerry Jones would characterize it in that way. I think Jerry Jones cares about winning. He cares about winning his way.
Right.
And so that's the problem. And it's the same problem Al Davis had, except he couldn't really make the kind of money that Jerry Jones is generating off the stuff he does down there. I mean, I sometimes I chuckle with what the Chiefs are doing now with these Chiefs fit places they're putting up around town. That's straight out of the Jerry Jones handbook. You go over to the Star, they got a health club right next to the team facility. Now, I've never seen that anywhere in the NFL. where you've got women walking into this place looking to meet Cowboys players who are parking in the same parking structure. But that's what he's about, the show.
Yeah, and he's great at it. He is great at the business side of it. There's no doubt about that. And by the way, for the Kansas City market and any other market with an NFL franchise, it's coming everywhere, right? They don't just want the buildings anymore. They want 3 blocks all the way around it and own all the businesses. So if you don't think there isn't going to be a team health club around every facility that they own, I mean, it's all coming. It's coming your way. And Jerry Jones is a guy that the owners, he should be in the NFL. Is he in the Hall of Fame? Did they finally put him in? I think
he is. Yeah. A couple years ago.
And he should be for what he's done for the business of football. But I am interested, and then we'll get off the Cowboys because I do want to move quickly here. I am interested in if Bob Kraft or Clark Hunt, let's say the most successful owner we've seen as far as winning Super Bowls, and the guy who seems to have the best formula right now, were to go hire the best coach for this team right now, or to make the best move. Is it stay with Mike McCarthy, or is there a guy that you say, hey, with that offense that's in place, this is it? Is it put Dan Quinn in? Is it blow the whole thing out and start over? Just, we don't have to go too far in it, but you have a perfect guy for what would actually be the right thing for personnel wise, Jeff.
This sounds really pessimistic. I think whoever you put in there is going to get the same results. I don't think there is anybody who's going to walk in there. If Parcells couldn't do it, a guy who's considered one of the best coaches in NFL history couldn't do it. There's nobody out there right now who's looking for a job, who's a sexy candidate, who's going to walk in there and take over this operation. I was talking to a friend today who's really close to a couple players down there in that team, and they just talk about the culture like it's just they know what it is. They know that the coaches who come in there can't get the ultimate respect because of what Jerry does. And having covered the Raiders back in the 90s, it's the same dynamic that Al Davis created. Players aren't dumb. They know they're going to get paid. They know they're going to be taken care of as long as they're with the owner. And that just usurps so much strength and leverage from a head coach. It just does. And so I don't think there's anybody out there who's ever going to do better than what Mike McCarthy's done.
Eric?
Yeah. I mean, I think McCarthy has lost his fastball a little bit in terms of, for a long, if you look at the statistics, he was doing a good job on 4th downs. He was a pretty good play caller. I think I wrote about this on PFF.com when he got hired by the Cowboys. Obviously, there's that joke. Well, it's not even a joke, but like when we met with McCarthy and we tried to, give him access to a lot of our stuff when he had his year off, like there was at least a little bit of an appetite to want to get better. But the God's honest truth is like, he's not with the modern times right now. And so, I hesitate to say specific names. I talked about this on the PFF forecast last night, where I think we'd like to throw names out there, folks who are associated with success, and we don't necessarily know, how much they contributed to it, But I sort of agree with Jeff. I think short of any guy who's already a really good head coach, right? Like I think if you put Sean Payton there, probably does pretty well. I think if you put Andy Reid there, probably does pretty well. And maybe that's what Payton wants. I was on Bobby Hebert's show, and they were basically saying, why do should Saints fans be worried that Sean Payton goes back to Dallas? Because that is
it's been rumored before.
Yeah, it's been rumored before. And the problem I have again is that Sean Payton does not care. Like Sean Payton would not care what Jerry Jones thinks. Right? A guy with that much power, a guy with that much chutzpah and all that stuff. Like that's not who Jerry Jones wants in that spot. Jerry Jones wants somebody who's a little desperate in that spot.
Yeah, no doubt. I'll tell you what I'd like to see: Jim Harbaugh down there, just for the fireworks. I would like to see Jim Harbaugh, Jerry Jones coexist. How long it would last? That would be amazing. The alpha.
I actually think, by the way, we'll talk about Harbaugh in a little bit, actually. So I'll keep that to myself.
Okay. All right, let's go to the Steelers. Who's next at quarterback? Eric, do you want to take a shot at that? What do you think their move is going to be? Because I don't think it's to stand pat, and I don't see the answer sitting in the draft. Not for the Pittsburgh Steelers where they sit right now. Where do they go at quarterback?
Yeah, I actually do think that in the draft, like they should take somebody with that pick. I think, we've been so desensitized to this idea that a guy can be taken in the middle of the first round and have success because, like, let's be honest, if you look at guys taken, and end pointing is so hard, but like, let's say 13 to 31, let's say, those draft, like the best guy that's been taken in that like group of players over the last like 15 years is Jay Cutler, right? And well, that's even more than 15 years, 20 years, let's say, Jay Cutler. And Mac Jones was taken at 15, and we've seen his limitations. He also was taken by a pretty good team. But like for the most part, like that area of the field is Paxton Lynch, EJ Manuel, and I wonder if this year maybe because there's such a flat curve of players at the position, Kenny Pickett, Matt Corral, the kid from North Carolina, Malik Willis from Liberty. If the Steelers actually don't get somebody who actually is useful there, because the guys they have right now, Haskins, the 15th overall pick, terrible, right? In that range as well. Mason Rudolph can't play either. And so I don't know. They're going to have a change at GM, right? It looks like Colbert's out after the draft. Tomlin's still there, so I don't think they're going to do a complete rebuild. But I actually think there's a pretty good chance that they go one of two directions. They either go in the draft and just bleed this season out a little bit and say, hey, we're going to rebuild, or they go Cousins, Carr, Garoppolo, or if they swing for the fence, and I don't think they should do this, I don't think their roster is good enough, Rodgers, Wilson.
Yeah, I think they're going to go free agent. I don't think they're going to look to the young guy. I think they feel like they've got a lot of the pieces that are in place, and so I think they look into free agency. Jeff, there was some talk that this was the landing spot for Aaron Rodgers. Was that there was wink, wink, nudge, nudge between Mike Tomlin and Aaron Rodgers after a game, and I think it'd be a perfect spot for Aaron Rodgers to land because I think there is good talent there. Right. And I think, at least as far as the receivers go and is that the route? Do they go with a veteran? And is there one that you think would be the perfect fit? Everyone's got Russell Wilson going to New York.
Yeah.
Why would you want either one of those franchises? I mean,
that's called his wife.
Well, and I understand that happy life, happy life.
Yeah.
But I mean, come on, like the Steelers would be a great fit for Russell Wilson to go to.
Yeah. For Rodgers.
Or for both of them, I think.
Yeah. I think, well, for the viewers here, I made a joke about Russell Wilson's wife, Sierra. That's kind of been the talk in Seattle, that she's basically wants to be someplace that's sexier, more cosmopolitan, and he's going along with this. But Rodgers, he's going someplace either warm or someplace West Coast. I just don't think he's going to go any place where it's going to be cold for a long period of time. I talked to him last offseason, and that's one thing he brought up about Green Bay that he's tired of is just it's so cold there. But I just don't think, like Eric said, I don't think that's the kind of franchise where he could do a lot of damage and really build his legacy to where he wants it before he ends his career. I think it's more likely that they go with some kind of middle-of-the-road free agent type veteran. I think a Gardner Minshew type guy is somebody who I could see going there. But their best path is really to go into the draft. Not a great draft class, but Kenny Pickett, they share a facility with the University of Pittsburgh. I'm sure they have a pretty good idea of what he is about, and he's a player who should be somewhere in that 15 to 20 range. I think they draft, 20 right now? Is that where they're going to end up? So the Matt Corrals of the world, there'll be somebody there. And this is a franchise that's never been afraid to play young quarterbacks. Their biggest sin here in all this is that they didn't have a plan in place before Roethlisberger decided he was going to call it quits. I mean, that to me is criminal when you're running a franchise. You let a guy who is already declining get to a place where he's holding your franchise, not so much hostage, that's too strong of a term, but he's putting you in a place where it could be 2 or 3 years before you crawl out of this hole.
Sorry, I apologize for cutting you off, Jeff.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it's the winner's tax, though, isn't it? Like when you get a quarterback that's going to the Hall of Fame, you're beholden to him. And, when they took Mason Rudolph in the third round, Ben Roethlisberger had a pity party. Yeah. We know Donovan McNabb wasn't happy when they took Kevin Cobb in the second round. No. I mean, now Andy Reid pressed the button and moved on to Cobb and then quickly on to Mike Vick. I mean, I think it is the right way to go. But if you go down that road, there's one, you're trying to tape it together to win one more with the guy you got. You're almost have to sell out to the guy, don't you?
Yeah, and that's historic. I mean, Peyton Manning was never happy about the idea of someone coming in who could challenge him for a job, and Matt Ryan's gone through that in Atlanta. That's why they are where they are right now. But my hope for Pittsburgh is that they ultimately change the way they look at the quarterback position. Get away from getting these 6'4", 220-pound statues playing quarterback and get with the times. Find somebody who can move around, somebody who's dynamic, because Mason Rudolph being your backup quarterback just speaks to how silly you are when it comes to evaluating the position. It's just you cannot win, and that division especially, where you have Joe Burrow and you have Lamar Jackson. Granted, that team was beat up this year. You better find somebody who can play, who's young, and can help you out for the next decade.
Well, that's the thing that I think about when I think about the Steelers, and I don't mean to be like, I don't mean to talk down to them or whatever, but like, isn't it just like time to face facts that you're not going to be that good? And I think, obviously the question has to be like, does Tomlin want to deal with it, right? Does Tomlin want to, sort of be part of a rebuild or whatever? But like the Browns, I think, are good quarterback play away from being good, right? They already beat the Steelers in the playoffs last year. The Bengals are still alive. And if anybody's watched Joe Burrow over the last, like this kind of reminds me, the AFC kind of reminds me of, Buffalo, KC being that Dallas, San Francisco, and the Bengals kind of remind me of Green Bay, right? Coming up with Brett Favre type of guy, right? And like, so the Bengals aren't going anywhere. The Ravens aren't going anywhere, right? With Lamar Jackson and John Harbaugh and, good coaching and things like that, in my opinion. So if I were the Steelers, and somebody asked me about the Raiders, today too, I was on Adam Hill's show and he was subbing for Cofield. And I'm just like, sometimes you got to look at the division and say, what really are our chances here? And I think the Steelers are in a place where they have to be honest with themselves. Because as Jeff said, you sort of delay the inevitable, you kick the can for long enough, and you're now you look up and you might have wasted TJ Watt's best years. You might have Cam Hayward. Like, I'm going to say this, I don't think that many people agree with me. Cam Hayward was the best player on that defense this year. And like, he was an absolute monster, and he's older than TJ Watt is. You have a bunch of guys like Minka and all those guys coming up on contract years, and it's like the Big Ben thing not resolving it 2 years ago was a problem.
Yeah, they're probably better off just being bad, embrace the suck, and take the higher picks. Divest yourself of all the big cap hits and move on. It'd probably be their best idea. I love this one. Aaron put it up there. If offered the job, it sounds like it's a done deal with Harbaugh going to Vegas. By the way, has there ever been a worse headline that if offered the job? I think the headline I saw yesterday was, if offered the job, Harbaugh would have interest. I mean, like, is that a story? Are we breaking news that we're saying if offered the job, right? Like, if offered the job, I'd have interest, but that's not news. Like, I'd give it a thought, but the story is, dumbass owner offers fatty talk show host head coaching job. You're bearing the lead if that's the case. I was amazed that, like, we're so in need of trying to break a story that I couldn't believe how preposterous it was. Well, if offered, well, he'd listen. Well, everybody will listen, right? Everybody, if nothing else, to get a raise wherever you're at, no matter what you're doing. Do we think that is this where you wanted to go, Eric? I'll give you. I know you were going to comment about Harbaugh. What did you want to say about Harbaugh earlier? And is it that he's going to be a Raider? You mentioned Adam Hill from the Las Vegas Review-Journal. He has been saying that he thought Jim Harbaugh would be the next coach of the Raiders for about 6, 7, 8 weeks. Is that finally going to come to fruition?
I think he has a chance. I think he could be using this to be the Bears head coach.
That's the other natural landing spot, right? He's a former Bears quarterback.
I don't know why you would, but that is something I'm hearing.
Go
ahead.
I was going to say, so you're saying this is like what you're hearing, or this is what you're speculating on?
No, this is what I'm hearing. I have no great intuition about this, but like that's something that could be a thing. And I kind of get it, right? Because
wait, hang on. I want to come back to that because it's kind of where Jeff is going with that as well. I want to nail this down a little bit stronger. Bears fans talk about Jim Harbaugh. Bears fans want Jim Harbaugh. Like, do you think that the Bears are actively seeking Jim Harbaugh? And like he's the number one guy, or just they have it as, let's kick the tires and see.
I think that there's interest at least from one or two sides, and I think that one of the two.
Yeah, I mean, so here's where I stand on it. I've heard there's definitely more interest on Harbaugh's side of this to move. That the pay cut that he took at Michigan last year is a major sticking point for him. That it's not a secret to people in and around Ann Arbor that his wife has never been fond of living in that city. That she's from Kansas, obviously from Kansas City, but she preferred to be in a more cosmopolitan place. And Michigan has not come up with a great offer to keep him so far. A very incentivized deal they're throwing his way. And so I think that this could have been resolved a lot sooner on Michigan's end, but they left the door open by not locking him up when this report started spreading around that there's not just smoke here. There's legitimate fire. Now, I don't know why you'd want Chicago when Mark Davis just gave the world to John Gruden, that I would think that you could get that same deal if you're Jim Harbaugh. I believe Jim Harbaugh is not going anywhere where he can't be the GM and coach. Now, if the Bears want to make that kind of move, it could work there. But I think he wants to be his own boss. And, and part of me suspects that Mark Davis and what he's doing is just because he took so much crap the way he hired Gruden last year, which is basically just throwing the contract out his way and talking to Deuce Staley on the way to the airport to pick up Gruden. That he's just, crossing T's and dotting I's right now before they make the move. But yeah, it is kind of weird that all these teams are interested in Harbaugh, but nobody's actually talking to him.
Is the Bears' job? Wait, who crossing I's and dotting I's and crossing T's with who?
With the league, just trying to make sure he's getting all his ducks in a row and talking to people he needs to talk to. Last time he didn't really do that. He caught some heat for the way he hired Gruden.
Okay. Which is a better job, real quick? Is it the Raiders' job or is it the Bears' job?
Bears' job, easy. Here's why.
Why?
Because if you coach the Raiders, you are going to be up against a buzzsaw for a decade. Chargers with Herbert. I'm not even Kansas City. Kansas City might not lose a division for a decade. Right? This was a year, and look, when I made the bet with Jeff, I was nervous. We were all nervous, 3-4, right? This was a year. This has been the worst Mahomes year, and they go and win 8 straight. Even in a year like this, that team is a house. The Chargers are going to be a house someday, and the Broncos have a way better roster than you do if you're Las Vegas, and you have a crappy quarterback situation. At least with the Bears, you have a young quarterback who's on a rookie deal, which, again, he might suck, but you can get out from under a rookie quarterback deal pretty easily, right? You also have a division where, look at this division. The Vikings, no GM, no coach. They're just right where you are. They even have the Kirk Cousins contract around their neck. Then you have Detroit, who, I kind of like what Detroit's doing, but look, it's Detroit, and they have to figure it out. Green Bay, Rodgers at some point is leaving at that place, right? So you have a division you can win, right? That's Chicago to me. I get ownership and I get all this, but I think Chicago's kind of a mess as far as ownership and all that kind of stuff is.
Kind of.
Yeah, but Las Vegas isn't exactly Las Vegas. I mean, look, the guy that owns the Vegas Raiders is walking around in some sweatpants that I wear on my rowing machine.
First of all, I call those sweatpants dressing up. So slow down there with your shots at the fashion there. I will say this, though, to Jeff's point, if we're talking about Harbaugh or any coach that's thinking the way Jeff is saying that Jim Harbaugh is thinking, that wanting to be his own coach and GM, you can get that with the Raiders.
Yeah.
Are you going to get that with the Bears?
Yeah. No. They've always had that structure in place. Unless they're thinking about changing it and blowing up, that would be astonishing to me that they would do that. I think they prefer having a GM and a coach. And
it provides a layer. I mean, I said it for years about Carl Peterson in front of Lamar Hunt. Carl Peterson took a lot of arrows for Lamar Hunt and the Hunt family because anything they did, raising prices, it was that SOB Carl Peterson. I mean, make no mistake about it, Lamar Hunt was the guy really making the money. But for the fans, there was always that it keeps the owners away from being front and center.
Yeah.
Right? And if that's going to be the case, then you can't really call the shots. You're not going direct to the owners. And there are a lot of coaches that are like, listen, I don't want to screw around with this guy in between.
Yeah.
And so I think from that, I think to Eric's point, if you want to win football games, definitely. If Rodgers is going to be out at Green Bay, then you got a better situation with the Bears. But if you want total control, it's the Raider job for sure.
Yeah, total control and an owner who will just stay out of be the anti-Jerry Jones, who will move out of the way and say, here you go. That's how Mark Davis was going to let John Gruden operate for 10 years until he just killed himself.
What do you want? Yeah. What do you want? I mean, between those two jobs. All right, let's turn our attention. By the way, does this mean with the firing of Mike Mayock that I'm no longer a candidate to be a general manager? Is it official now that since his tenure did not go well for the Raiders, that my dream of making my way into being a general manager is now over? Like,
I don't know, man.
Down that road again.
The way things are, the way this hiring cycle is going, it's like American Idol. Like anybody can get up there and get an interview, get an audition right now for a job.
I mean, the only prerequisite is to not have had a GM job before. There's no retreads in sight.
But isn't that smart? Like what retread has done well of late? I mean, isn't it time for some fresh blood?
Yeah, I mean, this is part of like the research I've done for some candidates, but it's like the interesting thing. I was talking this over with Brad Spielberger, who you had on the show last week, I want to say, and we were talking about why that was the case, because you get retread head coaches all the time. Like Dan, like I loved your segment on the show today about when Dan Quinn's going to get fired.
Yeah.
like talk to me in 3 years when Dan Quinn gets fired again, because I'm with you. I think Dan's like, everybody I talk to in the league loves Dan Quinn, and I think that's a problem, right? Like everybody thinks Dan Quinn's an amazing person. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. He was an amazing person for 2 years too long in Atlanta too, while I continue to lose money betting on that team. But I think it's this way. I think that the general managers are not necessarily money-wise, obviously, but they're viewed in the same class as the owners, right? When they sort of like mingle in those groups, whereas coaches are viewed as labor, I think. In most cases. Okay. And so I think GMs know too much about what's going on with ownerships and stuff, where once you get in and you get yours, you're basically just a consultant from here on out. Now we have had John Dorsey have, a couple stints and all that stuff, but like, we're certainly not seeing it now.
By the way, John Dorsey, I would like to know why his name isn't getting thrown around a little bit. I mean, I know, he got unceremoniously dumped in Kansas City for a number of different things. And in Cleveland, he got dumped as well. But he left a trail of quality players at both locations. And, it speaks to it's more than just putting good players on the field, because he put good players on the field. All right, let's turn our attention to the games. Let's start with the Chiefs and Bills. Sunday night, it grabs the headline spot. How significant is the news coming out today? Willie Gay has been released. He was arrested for about $225, I think, of damage done to a vacuum cleaner when he went to visit his child with the mother of the child. He's no longer with her. Apparently some ill will, hard feelings, whatever. And, he damaged a vacuum cleaner while he's there, not to make light of it, but better a vacuum cleaner than a person, right? Yeah. He's out. He was not at practice today. Does this affect what do you expect? Number one, will he be able to play, Jeff, in your mind?
I think he'll be playing. I mean, it would be surprising. I mean, Frank Clark's had 2 felonies hanging over his head for the last, year? He hadn't missed a game. So I don't know how not to make light of it, but I don't know where the precedent's here for Willie Gay to step away. I mean, I don't know if the league would step in at this point and do something, and I doubt the Chiefs would either. Not to say this is all about winning games. I'm sure they take this stuff seriously. I think the bigger issue with it is it's a distraction. It's a distraction. It's he misses practice. He's got to answer questions about it. It's a bad look. but I hate to be the guy who says it's becoming an annual thing with the Chiefs in the postseason where someone's getting arrested in January. But to me, it's a really bad decision on his part, and I don't want to get into his life and his lifestyle's relationship, but you just can't have this happen,
right?
Ever, really, but certainly not this time of year.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, it's a different situation than the Britt Reed stuff, right? Where
but it continues the theme. To Jeff's point,
it does continue a theme for sure. I mean,
it's a theme that's been with this franchise. I mean, let's be clear, they have at least their share of issues. Now that this one is, like you said, it's not
this one. This sounds really bad because anything that involves violence is bad, right? For sure. Right. The fact that the people I talk to, like, he didn't put his hands on anybody, any person, right? It was an issue of property and stuff like that. That's obviously, that's obviously a lot better than hitting a little girl with your car or whatever, like, and all that stuff we had last year. But to Jeff's point,
had he hit the woman, right, that would have been a much
exactly. And again, like, I'm assuming that it's just you're not, whatever happened in that place is just like not that far away from an altercation that involves hitting another person, right? They're probably close events, but they didn't cross that into that. So I'm assuming he'll play because there wasn't actual violence against another human. But to the point that Jeff's making, it's just another distraction. It's another one of those, why is this even a thing right now? Like, can it wait till the middle of next month? Whatever you're fighting about type of thing.
Couple of things. One, the child has had some complications, right? So there's been, and let's go back. I think it was October 8th. And this is what I think, Jeff, you mentioned bigger picture. First of all, I've had a chance to see, it's not very often you get to see guys anymore now in this COVID world or anything, but not directly, but around a situation where I've seen Willie Gay, I think is a soft-spoken, shy individual that I believe, from the little bit that I've been around him, like I said, I've been around him a little more than just covering the team, has a big heart, right? I would tend to think he's a good guy. This is a bad decision, and I'm not trying to make excuses for it. Just giving you a background on the guy. But I think the bigger picture is, on October 8th, he tweeted out, love y'all. You got to know my mental health is all effed up right now. All right. That is significant. And at a time, that's a public cry for help. Is it a public cry for attention? Maybe. But it's one that can't be taken lightly, and especially when this comes around now a little bit later on. Throw on the stress, a guy that, I mentioned this today, has lived his entire life in Starkville, Mississippi, until the Chiefs drafted him and brought him to Kansas City. I mean, he grew up in that town. Like, the world, you got to get out and see a little bit of the world. This guy's never seen it, right? I had somebody, describe him as country to me. This guy's country, right? Meaning that
that's how I see Starkville.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, right?
Not metropolitan. I'm not going there.
And so, I mean, I think the world is coming at him very fast, and he's not ready to handle it. I think that's clear. And I think hence that tweet in October, hence this situation. I think the bigger picture is to make sure that Willie Gay is getting the help he needs, right? So that's number one. And then number two, like, from a football standpoint, this is a guy that they didn't trust, to put on the field almost at all last year. So does missing a day of practice set him back more than it would anybody else? Because he's a key figure for this defense. He's one of the reasons where it turned around. I think it's something to watch. I'd like to believe one day of practice won't, put him on the sideline. But if all of a sudden Ben Neiman's playing 80% of the snaps and Willie Gay's playing 20% of the snaps, I see the look on Eric Eager's face. If you're catching us on the podcast, it's not a good one, right? It's not.
Yeah. And that's the thing, I think, with this team has made commitments to players who have had checkered pasts. And, for the most part, those players have done okay, right? Like, like Travis Kelce seems like has had a good career and seems like a very well-adjusted person now, right? Like, Frank Clark has had his issues. There have been other players who, that have turned it around. And I think, like, that's maybe one of the issues, right? Is, like, when you draft players who have had pasts that aren't the easiest, like, that's a commitment beyond the football field, right? That's a commitment to making sure that mental health happens, right? And like we talked about that with Bruce Arians and Antonio Brown a couple weeks ago, where it's like, look, one of the best things about having these resources like the NFL gives you, right? The fact that the games were terrible this weekend, and everybody, a third of the country watched those games this weekend, right? Those resources should be going into making these men, more healthy, right? Like, come on, like that, and I think that the Chiefs bear some responsibility there.
Yeah, and I think the thing about Willie Gay is that there's a history here of him being violent. Obviously, it was an on-field issue with a player a teammate that he punched. But again, if it'd be different, that hadn't happened. And the only thing I'll say here that is worth considering is that if you saw a video of him tearing his vacuum cleaner apart and he's throwing it at something, or it almost hits a kid, like, it's easy to say, oh, it was just a vacuum cleaner that got broken. Like, we don't know what he was doing with it. We don't know how it got broken, but we do know it was an issue where there was a violent action that was taken, and he spent a night in jail. So it's like, someone brought it up today. I was at a restaurant eating lunch, and someone said, "Oh, this isn't a big deal. It's like, it's just a vacuum cleaner." I said, "Well, it was a big deal to the girl. Somebody called the police."
Yeah, no doubt. I've also had people say, and we'll turn the page on this, if he was white, would he have spent a night in jail? I've had people say only in Overland Park does, a couple $100 damage to a vacuum cleaner get you in jail. Overland Park, Kansas, is a suburb of Kansas City for people that are listening elsewhere. Everybody has a different view. I agree. If we had video, we'd have a much better understanding. The video of the old Rams running back,
Zach Stacy.
Yeah, you're like, oh, domestic violence. You're like, well, I'm not sure. You watch that video and you're like, good Lord. Like, I mean, hell came into that apartment that night. And so, yes, we might be like, oh, I've been told, that he kicked a vacuum on his way out. Is that it? Like, vacuum's in my way, and he kicked it out of the way, and it broke the vacuum, and it, or like you said, Jeff, was it picked up, raised over his head, thrown on the ground? Like there are different shades that we don't know. Does this come down to just a quarterback matchup? Eric, is it whoever plays better at quarterback? Which is generally how NFL games go. But I mean, is this just a referendum on the two quarterbacks?
Yeah, it was strange. I was on Chris's show today, and we were talking about
how many shows you do today, Eric.
Dude, it's unbelievable. It's gotten out of control.
15 shows.
It has gotten out of control. I will say that. But I always show up for this.
I've got 4 tomorrow, so
okay.
if I'm doing 4,
I got to tell you guys, I'm 100% for this show every time. 100%. So, but I was on Collinsworth's show, and we were talking about, it was Bucs Rams. And we just we spun through every little intricacy, Tristan Wirfs, Andrew Whitworth, Jordan Fuller, all this nonsense. And then we got to Bills Chiefs. I'm like, yeah, it's whether Mahomes plays his best game or Josh Allen plays his best game. And I do think there's some nuance to it, because Buffalo defense has been amazing this year. And, even without Tre'Davious White, they've contested 18% of balls thrown into their coverage. The Chiefs have had less than 10% of their passes contested. So that's a strength on strength. Buffalo top 5 mark in the league, Chiefs top part in the league, the only team under 10% this year. There are some intricacies there. Willie Gay plays into that as well. But no, this comes down to which quarterback plays better. And that's, it kind of boring, but also I think we're privileged to see it.
Yeah. By the way, we should mention, because there's been some talk in the chat room, the Chiefs did sign Damon Arnett to a futures contract today.
Wow.
The timing is not strong.
No.
I had somebody on the team. I had somebody within the front office text me and say, and he goes, and by the way, we signed Damon Arnett today. It's going to look bad.
I mean, that's a rough look. I mean, that is a rough look.
I think I have a great marriage, but my wife doesn't love me as much as Brett Veach loves signing former failed first-round picks.
And corners too, apparently.
Yeah, corners. But let's not forget about Taco Charlton. Let's not forget about Cam Irving. Let's not forget the guy Reggie Ragland's a second-round pick, but the guy just loves signing crap ass old guys who failed.
Yeah, but what's wrong with that? What if you had a good scout on the guy?
One man's trash
for pennies on the dollar. Why not? Let me see if my staff can do. My coaching staff can do something with him.
Yeah,
now,
I mean,
I'm not for signing Damon Arnett right now, but I'm saying the idea of failed first round picks. I mean, Jim Plunkett's happened. I mean,
the thing is up until now, like we're finally starting to see maybe a little success from that move, right? Like Mike Hughes could be considered a success. Baker's not so far, and the guys I listed they all kind of were duds. But yeah, he takes swings. Kelvin Benjamin was a former first round pick, and they brought him in. Like that is Veach's motto. And again, like I don't like Arnett because like when he was putting up his numbers at Ohio State, he was 23 years old, and so like he was a bad prospect He wasn't a first round pick, to be honest with you, and neither was DeAndre Baker in the minds of many. But at the same time, they're low stakes gambles. The only thing that this really costs the Chiefs is some credibility, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it is. Listen, they've brought in other guys. Like I forget the Florida wide receiver that the Browns took in the second or third round. That was a first round talent.
Callaway.
Yeah, Callaway. They brought in Antonio Callaway.
Well, DeAndre Baker had history.
Yeah, but I'm saying just because they're brought in, we've named off guys who all made the team. There are other guys that have been brought in that don't ever end up making the team. Mm-hmm. It should be pointed out. But the optics suck. There's no way around that one. I mean, the optics suck. All right, let's turn our attention to the Titans and Bengals. Are the Titans being underrated? Are the Bengals being overrated? Because we're 4 or 5 weeks removed from the Bengals being, they look like they're going to be pretty good, right? And they didn't exactly hammer the Raiders, who are not exactly God's gift to football here. I mean, they give them credit. They created the turnover, right? The takeaway. I'm sorry, Jeff. Created the takeaway. That was huge in that game. But like, there's kind of a feeling that like the Bengals are ready to be the top team in the AFC from a lot of people. Is a week off having everybody sleeping on the Titans now?
It's a flavor of the month dynamic for sure that's going on here with Cincinnati. I like the Bengals. They're fun to watch, but you lose your defensive tackle, one of your defensive tackles, Larry Ogunjobi, who's played well for them on the interior. They got Trey Henderson back from concussion protocol, but they've got a couple other backups who are banged up, and Mike Daniels is gone for the year now with the groin. And so you don't want to have defensive line issues when you're facing the Tennessee Titans. That's first thing to consider. Like they're going to jam the ball down your throat if you don't have people up front who can stop it. But the Titans are they're an easy team to diminish or to dismiss because they're not as sexy as the Chiefs, not as sexy as the Bills. And so they've got a quarterback who's a middle of the road, game manager. They have a playing style that fits more with a team Don Shula should be coaching than a 2021-22 team. And so I get it, but I have a lot of respect for a team that puts 90 players on the active roster over the course of a season and finds a way to be the top seed in the AFC playoffs. That loses their best player, their second best player, and arguably their third best player, and somehow finds a way to win 12 games. They've beaten up on some good teams this year. They beat the Bills, they beat the Chiefs, they beat the Rams. And so at some point, it's not so much about how sexy is your quarterback or how explosive is your offense. It's about you get the job done. And I think the Titans, I think that they're going to beat the Bengals, and they're going to be hosting the AFC title game next week.
They did lose to the Jets and the Texans, right?
Yep.
But you can't argue with the caliber. They lost the Cardinals for whatever that's worth. But you can't argue with the caliber of wins that they put together, particularly at a time that they really started getting banged up, beating the Bills, Chiefs, at the Colts, at the Rams, and then a game Saints team. That was a hell of a stretch. And, so their pedigree of victory is not to be questioned. Eric, I will ask you this. To me, what I think would be scary if you're the Bengals and the rest of the NFL, the rest of the teams alive, is can they bring themselves to not just pound Derrick Henry? Can they actually, if you want to play that style, D'Onta Foreman has reemerged from his time in Texas with the Texas Longhorns, because he never really was that great with Houston or anywhere else he's been. But he's really found a fit there. And the scary thing to me would be is if they do go all out ground and pound. You mentioned 70s Don Shula, right? Not Dan Marino, Don Shula. Bob Greasy winning
Baltimore coach Don Shula.
Bob Greasy winning Super Bowl MVP, attempting 7 passes. Yeah. That Don Shula, right? When he won the Super Bowl with Bob Greasy there. Like that 1-2 punch is scary because, they might just try to, even if you're having a pretty good day and holding them to 2, 4, 5, like they might run it on 3rd and 6 and get it and just say, we are going to beat the hell out of you. I mean, is that the way the Titans should play this moving forward now that they have Henry back in the mix?
I think so, but when I look at Tennessee contests one of the lowest rates of passes in the NFL. The Bengals when they're underdogs, and here's the thing: like people will say, like this is the most underrated 1 seed we've ever seen. Like the Nick Foles Philadelphia Eagles were 1-point underdogs when they faced in the divisional round the Falcons 2017. It's not unprecedented, and again, this could be a good news for the Titans that 1 seed matters because the Eagles, as banged up as they were that year, went and won the Super Bowl. But they're 3.5-point underdogs, and Joe Burrow, to me, like I think of Joe Burrow very, very positively from the aspect of at some point he decided that it was his offense and not Zach Taylor's offense, because I think Zach Taylor kind of, if he has his druthers, like I think he runs the ball too much. I think he doesn't put the ball in Chase's head. Like Jamar Chase from that Baltimore game, he had 200 yards all the way down to, I believe it was the Ravens game prior to the Chiefs game, that he didn't have like over 80 yards in any of those games. And so there was like a little lull there. And I think Burrow that kind of resurrected him. I think that the Bengals are going to put the Titans in a position to have to throw and to have to be aggressive on offense. And to me, I don't necessarily know if that's a bad thing because A.J. Brown's as good as any wide receiver in the NFL, not named like Devontae Adams or Tyreek Hill or whatever. And Julio Jones is no schmuck either. And Tannehill's an okay quarterback, a pretty good quarterback, frankly. The thing about Henry that I think sneaky, and if you're betting on Tennessee based upon the Henry thing, Henry is slow to go in every single season. The year Tannehill took over from Mariota, he was like 3.5 yards to carry the first like 6 weeks. Last year he struggled early coming out of the gate, and he gets stronger as the season progresses. He's kind of like starting a season over in the playoffs. And so I don't necessarily know if you're getting the MVP in that running game from Henry and that's not as good for that offense, because I agree with you. Foreman has done a pretty good job. And if they lean away from him and go more to Henry, it could be a worse outcome than we're all baking into the cake here.
Yeah. I think, listen, they're all fun matchups, right? I think that one is really cool because it's a matter of, do the Titans get passed by the Bengals, right? The Titans are still fighting to make it our time. And here are the Bengals, who really are supposed to be a year or two away, that are maybe they're going to go right past them and grab this game. I think is amazing to think about. Let's go to the NFC side. Bucs and Rams. There's a lot riding on this from a Rams standpoint. We've talked about it all year, how the Rams are all in. Matt Stafford is trying to get the monkey off his back. He finally got a playoff win. I think there's such a referendum on him. Listen, if the Rams go and win a Super Bowl, the biggest loser are Lions fans, because it just proves that like the Lions really do suppress everything to the nth degree. If Stafford can leave town and immediately
that's already been proven, Soren. It's just more evidence of it.
This is our resident Michigan man. I mean, but I actually like the Rams in this game. I think it's I agree kind of with what Aaron says. He said now that the postseason win monkey is off his back, Stafford from a few weeks ago going to show up and throw 3 picks. No, I don't think so. He might, right? I don't have a crystal ball, but he's capable of playing good football. And they're in their mind, I think they're on a free roll. They shouldn't be thinking that, right? Because of how much everything, numerous years in the future are on this season. But they certainly played really loose against the Cardinals and completely outclassed Arizona.
Yeah. Well, look, they ain't getting Kyler Murray in this game. For one thing, right? They're not.
Think about that statement.
Yeah.
9 weeks ago, 10
Yeah.
weeks ago, Kyler Murray was the leader. Maybe even 7 weeks ago was the leader for the MVP, and you just made the statement they ain't getting Kyler Murray. Talk about a star that's fallen.
Yeah,
right?
No, I agree. And that's not to say that that's more about Tom Brady than it is about Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray is a fine player, but Tom Brady's not going to be throwing the ball out the end zone for 1 yard interception returns for touchdowns. I think that, look, what concerns me about the Bucs in this game is Tristan Wirfs' ankle. He's an all-pro right tackle. Ryan Jensen got banged up, but he was able to practice this week. So if Wirfs can't go, you got a banged up offensive line going against Aaron Donald and Von Miller and Leonard Floyd and those guys. You saw how they came after Murray in that game on Monday night. It's a tough prospect, and we all know Tom Brady does not like to have pressure on him. I just find it hard to believe that Tom Brady is going to lose a playoff game to Matthew Stafford. I just feel like Matthew Stafford throwing whatever it was, 17 passes in that game was in some ways an indictment of how his coach is thinking about him right now. We cannot put him in positions to hurt us. And so I think he's going to have to throw more footballs in this game. I saw a crazy stat about Tom Brady. He hadn't lost a divisional round playoff game since 2010. And so this is the kind of game where he feasts. And as much as I've been down on them because of their injuries, the lack of weapons around them, I think they can find a way. Especially underrated part of the Rams situation right now is just that their safeties are beat up. They had to go out and sign Eric Weddle off the street. You get guys in the back end who are beat up against Tom Brady. He'll find a way to make you pay for that.
Yeah, this is a very Jeff. You bring up a really good point. So the Rams, they play the same coverage that they show pre-snap. So we do this thing where you middle of the field open, which is basically too high, middle of the field closed, which is basically cover three, and the Rams basically disguise that coverage pre-snap to what they actually play 45% of the time, which is 9% higher than any other team in the entire league. Tom Brady this year, when the other team doesn't disguise coverage, 35 touchdowns, 7 picks. When they do, 8 touchdowns, 5 picks. So to what Jeff is saying, if you don't have Jordan Fuller back there, right, and you don't feel comfortable disguising your looks, pre and post snap, then Brady's going to carve you. And if you can, that's I think what the leak is for the Bucs, because to me, the 4 sacks or however many sacks it was, I think it was 3 third down sacks that the Philadelphia Eagles got on Brady in that game on Sunday. I think it's a fundamentally different task to play offense when your offensive line gets hurt in the middle of a game than it is to play offense when your offensive line, where a priori before the game that guys are going to be sitting. So to me, I think Brady, and this is, Brady protects his offensive line better than anybody who's ever played the game. And so I think that'll be okay. When you look at the other side, Jeff made a great point. They protected Stafford Monday night. They ran the ball to Michelle. They ran the ball to Akers. They had success doing that. And then Stafford was good in the very limited amount of time. I mean, he didn't put the ball in harm's way at all because he didn't throw the ball at all. He had 12 completions the whole game. And in my opinion, when you go up against Andrew Whitworth might be out of this game. He's questionable. No one's talking about that. They're all talking about Wirfs and Jensen. Andrew Whitworth, best offensive lineman for the Rams, possibly out. And then you go, if you're trying to run the football on early downs against Vita Vea, Ndamukong Suh, Shaq Barrett, Jason Pierre-Paul, and Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, and those 2 linebackers behind them, good luck, right? It's not going to be duckies and bunnies on offense for the Rams. So Stafford's going to have to be a big boy quarterback on Sunday, and I just don't think he can.
Stat Padford, is that yours, Jeff?
I didn't know where that came from, but
pretty good.
I like it.
Pretty good.
I'll take credit for it. I didn't come up with it. I'll take credit for it.
Yeah, show me Stat Padford, Jeff's nickname for him. I'm like, I hadn't heard that one, man. Lay that one out there. That's strong. I think that's fantastic. I agree, but I do also think you talk about leaky coverages and everything. I get that, but they do have to. Aaron Donald is immediately in your face, and that's the kind of pressure that really bothers Tom Brady. And when he can't step up, when you can't, part the Red Seas for him to see wide open in front of him, then he does not have good days. And I think that may be a fatal flaw in the matchup. I like what you're saying about the secondary, but it may not get to that if Tom Brady can't step up and get there. All right, the Packers, 49ers, the spread is 6. I mean, I usually love me some dogs when it's a 6-point dog. And, I heard some people, talking about how great the Niners are, and this is a real matchup problem for them, for the Packers. I also heard Eric, you and George talking on the forecast about how, hey, you got a bad hand, was it thumb or one? Which fingers?
And shoulder,
right hand, right there, right hand
on Garoppolo, and he's going to play in like bone-numbing weather. Like that's not good for throwing the ball, and he didn't throw it well indoors last week, missing an easy throw to Brandon Ayuk, throwing a bad interception. Like you can go into all the things. There are a lot of things to like about the other 52 guys of the Niners that they're going to throw at the Packers. But again, is this one just about Aaron Rodgers versus Jimmy Garoppolo, Jeff?
I don't think it's that simple, but I do believe that Aaron Rodgers comes into this game with a much better supporting cast than he's had playing against the Niners in the postseason, which means a lot. I think it's interesting how in games like this it becomes so much about the big name people, but it's like I look at the Packers and it's guys like Rasul Douglas and it's guys like Devondre Campbell and Kenny Clark and people of that ilk who have helped this team become the number 1 seed. And the Niners, they want to pound you. It's no secret. They want to beat you up. But the Packers are built more for that than people give them credit for. I don't know why it's like become this, the Niners, they go around and just beat people up all the time. No one can deal with that. They're a bad matchup. Yeah, but they also, as you said, they've got a quarterback who, like Stafford, can make a lot of bad decisions. And their offense really is built around 2 players, Deebo Samuel and George Kittle. And so I just look at the matchup and think Green Bay's got a lot going for it here, including the MVP of the league, potential MVP of the league, 1-degree weather. The Niners, I don't know where Nick Bosa is in concussion protocol. I haven't seen is he going to play? Do we know yet? Is he out of protocol?
I don't think we know yet, do we?
Yeah, and
I'll look for the latest.
And Fred Warner is going to play, but he got banged up, tweaked his ankle last week. So, look, I have a lot of respect for the Niners. I love how they play. I love that style of football. They ain't going into Green Bay winning this game. I can promise you that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. This number opened at 4.5. I was sort of talking about how it didn't make a lot of sense to me because Green Bay, from a home field advantage, but also a travel and also a rest. The Niners were playing Sunday last week. Now they're playing Saturday this week against a team coming off a bye. That to me, like all that stuff is to me worth 3 points. So this thing opening at 4.5 is basically saying that the 49ers are 1.5 points worse than the Packers. Just to me seemed a little bit too short. The number got bet out to 6, which makes a little bit more sense. But now, Petro, we're seeing this number is getting it's at 5.5 now, trending towards 5 again. And I think people are talking themselves into what you like. And I agree. I think if you're an old school football guy or you are a kind of a football junkie, you can talk yourself into the Niners because the Niners do so much fun thing. They do so many cool things, right? They do all the, they're second in the NFL. So the Titans, for example, Titans are first in the NFL in early down run rate. They run the ball on early downs more than anybody. And they face the heaviest boxes in the NFL on early downs. The Niners are the second most heavy run team in the NFL on early downs, but they don't face one of the top 5 box rates in the NFL. That means that Shanahan's doing the motion stuff that's getting people out of the box, right? And that's why you get guys like Elijah Mitchell having, success in these games. And all that matters, right? All that's great. But ultimately, this is kind of like what we talked about with Bills Chiefs. If Aaron Rodgers plays an A+ game, ain't no chance the 49ers are winning that game. No chance. And it's because the quarterback for the Niners can't play well enough to overcome that. He just can't. And that's the point. I mean, if Rodgers lays an egg, then yeah, I mean, it'll be a meat grinder. And the Packers defense has been soft against the run at times. But Rodgers with a week off against a team that didn't want to trade for him, also all that kind of stuff. I think Rodgers is gonna flame them.
By the way, when you're talking about going west or someplace warm, I mean, you're either talking Dolphins or Niners, aren't you, Jeff, when we were talking about the quarterbacks earlier? I mean, so is this a tryout for Aaron Rodgers? 49ers? I want to answer your question about Nick Bosa. Tuesday, no practice, limited Wednesday, full go on Thursday.
Okay.
So Bosa was a full go, officially listed as questionable on the injury report as of today. So Fred Warner was a full go today. And what was the other big one? They've got a number of other folks. I think that was it. Was there somebody else who was hurt for the Niners? Anyway, Jordan Willis.
Yeah.
Jordan Willis, questionable. He was limited today in practice for him. Bakhtiari practiced on Wednesday, limited. They called today a load management day. He's still listed at questionable whether or not he gets back to play. Left tackle for the Packers. So that's the injuries in that one. I mean, how about it, Jeff? I mean, this, I think, Aaron Rodgers is just too good and too familiar with the weather to let this chance go. But I would have told you the same thing of Aaron Rodgers against the Bucs last year. I mean, why is it that he can't? Is it an indictment of the Packers or an indictment of him that he has only one time made his way to the Super Bowl? And there have been guys, like maybe he hadn't had the best weapons, but it's never been sitting there, throwing to chum. I mean, what is the problem here? And why should anybody think it's suddenly fixed this year?
Well, I think the one thing I think about, there's two things. One is that I feel like all the shit he stirred up over the past year, he knows if he doesn't make it happen this year, he's never going to hear the end of it. Like that will define his legacy. So when you do all that stuff in the off season, you become a prima donna, or you play the prima donna part to the hilt. You call out your GM when you come into training camp. You lie about getting vaccinated for COVID, all this stuff. He's got an us against the world mentality going right now. And so I think, for one, he knows he's got to play his best football and he's got to deliver. The other part of it, too, is that I think sometimes you just have bad timing or bad luck. I remember that NFC Championship game in Seattle years ago when they were up big and had a chance to close out the game with an onside kick, and some backup tight end decides he wants to be a hero, flubs the play, and Seattle gets the ball and goes down and ties it up. He caught Matt Ryan at a time when Matt Ryan was super hot. He caught Eli Manning at a time when Eli Manning was super hot. Sometimes it's just not your day. But I don't buy into the narrative that his legacy is going to be that of a loser or a guy who just should have won more and didn't. Drew Brees won one Super Bowl. No one's giving him a hard time about it. Brett Favre won one Super Bowl. Played in two, but nobody's giving him a hard time about it.
True. Marino does get a hard time, and Brees is considered the little engine that could. He's 5'11 and a half. Yep. Aaron Rodgers is supposedly the prototype. I mean, he's a little under the average at 6 feet 2 inches tall, but for the most part, and I think it's also he gets grief because he has looked so good that many people have said he's the best thrower of the football that's ever lived. No. And when you then don't win, you screwed up. I didn't misidentify you. I know what I saw, and I'm always right. So you screwed it up, right? And I think there is something to be said that when we now see him kind of exposed in his need to get the limelight, that maybe it's not his throwing the football. It's the 6 other days that everybody has to be around him that maybe he is a cancer on the team.
Yeah. Well, that's an aspect of it. I guess I don't look at – this may sound weird now because of where Aaron's at in his career. I feel like for a long time Aaron was in the shadow of Peyton Manning and Tom Brady at the part of his career, earlier parts of his career. And then when people began to look at it, they began to say, well, why hasn't he done more? And I get it. Look, I'm not saying that people don't have a legitimate gripe about the way his career has played out, but I also feel like so much of winning in this league is about timing. Yeah. And that I look at Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City, for example. I mean, he shows up with a team that already has a spectacular wide receiver, a future Hall of Fame tight end, 2 really good offensive tackles, a head coach who's one of the best coaches in the history of the NFL. I mean, you're set up to have success right away. Aaron Rodgers, walked into a good situation with Green Bay, but he had to go through his ups and downs. That team got built up. I still believe that team that was 15-1 after they won the Super Bowl is one of the best teams I've ever seen in the NFL. But they had a lot of injuries. Guys like Michael Finley had career-ending injuries. People forget about how good a safety Nick Collins was. He lost his career to an injury. They had some bumps and bruises along the way that ultimately robbed him of a chance to have that kind of immortality that we're talking about. So I think some of this is really just bad timing.
You mentioned being in the shadows. Some people would say he was in the shadows because he couldn't bust through and win a championship, right? He couldn't do what those other guys were doing, and so he put himself in the shadows. Last thing, Eric, I want to ask you this: is LaFleur ready? Temecula asked this: is LaFleur ready? Legit question after the past 2 years' playoff performance. Is there a problem with LaFleur when it comes to the postseason? I mean, he certainly, he didn't get the better of Bruce Arians last year.
Yeah, I mean, I think LaFleur's great. People want to talk about how easy it would have been to go get, have Rodgers and all this stuff. I mean, that team with McCarthy had 2 straight losing seasons before LaFleur took over. And, even in 2019, I don't think Rodgers played terribly well. You look at like his efficiency stuff. He's uncovered, I think, the second rebirth of Rodgers through calling plays. I mean, he had the little snafu with the kicking the field goal down 8 at the end of the game. We've talked about that a number of times. I think, he was just, his analytics crew had a different set of numbers than I think everybody else did, and he was just following them. But this team's motivated. I mean, you can't argue with 13 wins 3 straight years, right? I mean, he's made the NFC title game in both years. It's not like he's losing playoff games he's not going over in the playoffs. He's losing the title game twice in a row to teams that, the 2019 Niners were really good, and they were on the road in that game. The Bucs, I mean, losing a playoff game to Tom Brady is nothing, to cry in your beer about, So this is the big one, though. I agree with, what Jeff is saying. I think a lot of what Jeff is saying about Rodgers also applies to LaFleur. I think, LaFleur sort of being the guy to sort of keep it all together when Rodgers was doing his thing and they get their butts kicked in week 1 in New Orleans and all this stuff. Like, that's a big feather in his cap. He's got to win this. He's got to go to the Super Bowl this year. And I think he's ready to do so. And I think it starts this week with a win against the Niners.
Yeah, 3 straight years, 13 wins, but 3 straight years 1-1, or 2 straight years 1-1 in the playoffs. That's the part that has to change. All right, real quick, just no explanation. Just what's your Super Bowl? Who beats who right now? I'm gonna sound like a complete homer, but I'm gonna go Chiefs over Packers, which is my pick before the season. I before the playoffs, I would have told you Bills over Packers. But I think now, based upon how well the Bills played, you just don't play that well 2 weeks in a row. I think Kansas City gets it done. I'll take KC over Green Bay. Jeff?
I got Packers over Bills. That's where it ended the regular season, and it feels like Josh Allen is getting on a run that reminds me of what Aaron Rodgers got on when he got in his Super Bowl run, where Eli Manning was, Joe Flacco. If he goes out and he wins this game against Kansas City, I think he's going to have a nice role in the playoffs.
Eric?
Chiefs over Bucs.
Chiefs over Bucs. There it is. All right, that's going to do it for us. Thanks for joining us. Remember, if you're catching us on the podcast, we stream live on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Central. With the Two Deep, we do our Red, Gold, and Bold, a Kansas City Chiefs podcast. We do that every Tuesday. We stream that Tuesdays live at 9 p.m. If you haven't heard that one, check that one out as well. So for Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network and NFL.com, Eric Eager from PFF.com, I'm Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City saying thank you very much for joining us here on the Two Deep podcast.